The morning started like any other day on the International Space Station. Captain James Miller floated near the observation window, sipping his morning coffee from a sealed container while watching the sunrise over Earth's curved horizon. His peaceful moment was cut short by a flash of light that definitely wasn't the sun. "Control, are you seeing this?" Miller called down to Houston. Static answered him. All communications were dead. The light grew bigger, taking shape into something that made Miller's coffee nearly slip from his hand. A massive ship, easily 10 times the size of the ISS, appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Its surface gleamed with an otherworldly metal that shifted colors like oil on water. "Everyone to the main module," Miller ordered his crew of 5 through the internal comm system. "Stay calm. We've trained for first contact scenarios." Though truthfully, those training sessions had always felt more like a joke than serious preparation. Before the crew could gather, a beam of light shot from the alien ship to the ISS's main airlock. The station's systems went haywire, lights flickering, sensors beeping, and warning signals flashing everywhere. "Your primitive vessel's security has been temporarily disabled," a voice echoed in their heads. "Do not be alarmed. We are the Vinder, your new mentors." 3 tall figures materialized in the main module. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in what looked like liquid metal suits. Their faces were humanoid, but with metallic skin that rippled like mercury. The middle figure stepped forward, its head tilted in what Miller recognized as a universal gesture of superiority. "I am Observer First Class Trell. We have been watching your species for some time. The Galactic Council has finally decided you require guidance." Miller kept his face neutral, though his military training screamed at him to reach for a weapon. "Welcome aboard the International Space Station. I'm Captain James Miller, representing Earth." Trell made a sound like metal grinding against metal, apparently their version of a laugh. "How quaint. You call this primitive construct a space station. It's barely more than an orbital shack." The crew bristled at the insult, but Miller held up his hand. "Getting angry wouldn't help. We're proud of what we've accomplished on our own," he said calmly. "On your own." Another grinding laugh. "That's precisely the problem. Your species is too aggressive, too unpredictable to be left alone. We've seen your entertainment broadcasts. Constant warfare, violence, destruction. The Council has decided you need proper civilization." Miller's jaw tightened. "We've made mistakes, but we learned from them. Humanity has come a long way." "Yes, yes," Trell waved a rippling metal hand dismissively. "In a mere few thousand years, you've gone from throwing stones to barely touching your own moon. Impressive for primitives, I suppose." The other 2 aliens moved around the module, scanning everything with devices that looked like liquid metal spiders. They commented to each other in grinding tones, clearly unimpressed. "Your species has potential," Trell continued, "but you're like children playing with fire. We'll teach you the proper way to join galactic society. Under our supervision, of course." Miller noticed something interesting. Despite their advanced technology, the aliens moved cautiously in zero gravity. They kept touching walls for support, their movements far less fluid than his crew's. "We appreciate the offer," Miller said carefully, filing away his observations. "But Earth has its own governing bodies. Any decisions about our future would need to go through proper channels." Trell's metallic face rippled in what might have been amusement. "You mistake this for a negotiation, Captain. We're informing you of what will happen. The Vindari have guided dozens of primitive species to civilization. Some resisted at first, but all eventually saw the wisdom of our way." As the aliens continued their inspection, Miller caught his science officer's eye. She had noticed it too. The way their advanced suits seemed to struggle with basic radiation shielding, requiring constant adjustments. For all their arrogance, these aliens weren't as superior as they thought. "We'll be in contact with your world leaders soon," Trell announced. "Dude tried to make them understand that resistance would be unfortunate." With another flash of light, they vanished, leaving behind a stunned crew and one very thoughtful captain. Miller looked out at their ship and smiled slightly. The Vinder had just made a serious mistake. They'd shown their hand too early, and they'd badly underestimated humanity's ability to notice details. "Get me Houston," he ordered. "I think Earth needs to prepare for some interesting times ahead." 3 days after first contact, the world was still in chaos. News channels played endless footage of the massive Vinder ships hovering over major cities. Captain Miller stood in the United Nations emergency session, watching the Vinder ambassador address Earth's leaders. "Your species has 30 Earth days to accept our guidance," Ambassador Trell announced, his metallic form gleaming under the lights. "We have prepared a simple schedule for your civilization's development. In 50 years, you might be ready for limited interstellar travel. In 100, perhaps you can join the lower ranks of galactic society." Miller noticed the Chinese president lean forward. "And if we refuse this generous offer?" Trell's liquid metal face rippled in that now familiar expression of contempt. "Then we will be forced to take more direct action. We've dealt with stubborn species before. Some required demonstrations of our power." The room erupted in angry shouts and arguments. Miller watched as Trell seemed to enjoy the chaos, his metallic skin glittering with amusement. "If I may," Miller spoke up, his voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent. After all, he was the first human to meet the aliens. "Ambassador Trell, you speak of demonstrations. Would you be willing to show us some of your technology, to help us understand the benefits of your guidance?" Trell paused, then made that grinding laugh. "An excellent suggestion, Captain. Yes, let us show you what proper civilization looks like." The demonstration was held outside New York City the next day. 3 Vinder ships performed what they called basic maneuvers, zipping through the sky in complex patterns. They showed off their matter transportation technology, their energy weapons, and their shield systems. But Miller wasn't watching the show. He was watching the data. Working with Dr. Anna Wells, a quantum physicist he'd specifically requested, they noticed patterns in the Vinder technology. "Look at the energy readings," Dr. Wells whispered, showing him her tablet. "Their shields flicker every time they use their transporters. And their weapons. The energy efficiency is terrible. They're brute-forcing everything with raw power." Miller nodded. "Notice how they never demonstrate 2 systems at once. I think each system requires their full attention." The Vinder finished their display with a flourish, teleporting a small mountain from one location to another. The crowd gasped appropriately. "You see," Trell addressed the gathered leaders, "this is but a fraction of our capabilities. Under our guidance, you might achieve such feats in a mere century or 2. Miller stepped forward. "Impressive transportation technology, Ambassador. Though I noticed it requires significant power. On Earth, we often focus on efficiency over raw power. Different approach, I suppose." For a moment, Trell's metallic face froze. "You dare critique our technology? Your species can barely reach your own moon." "Not critiquing," Miller said calmly. "Just observing. We're eager to learn, after all. For instance, I'm curious about your radiation shielding. It seems to need constant adjustment." The atmosphere changed instantly. Trell's metallic skin rippled with barely contained anger. "You understand nothing. Your primitive observations are like an ant trying to comprehend a starship." Dr. Wells smiled slightly. "Ants are fascinating, actually. They can lift many times their body weight and build complex structures with minimal energy waste. Nature often finds elegant solutions." Trell turned to his aides, grinding out words in their language. Miller caught what seemed like concern in their movements. "You have 30 days, Trell snapped. "Accept our guidance, or face the consequences of your arrogance. We will not waste more time with your primitive questions." As the Vinder teleported away, Dr. Wells turned to Miller. "They're scared," she said quietly. "Did you see how defensive they got? Their technology is advanced. But it's inefficient, inflexible, and they rely too heavily on brute force." Miller finished. They've probably been the biggest fish in their pond for so long, they stopped innovating. And now they're realizing that the small fish might have some teeth they didn't expect. Dr. Wells grinned. Miller looked up at the Vinder ships. 30 days. Let's make them count. 2 weeks had passed since the Ultimatum. Deep inside a repurposed bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, Captain Miller watched Dr. Wells work her magic. Screens covered the walls, showing data from the Vinder demonstrations and their ships. It's like they never had to fight an equal opponent, Dr. Wells said, pointing to a simulation. Their shields are designed to handle massive energy impacts, but look what happens when we hit them with rapidly changing frequencies. The simulation showed the Vinder shield flickering wildly under a pattern of weak but quick-changing energy pulses. Miller leaned forward, interested, like jabbing someone in different spots instead of throwing one big punch. Exactly. Dr. Wells pulled up another screen. Their whole technology base works this way. Big, powerful, but rigid. They don't adapt well to change. A young engineer named Tom rushed in, holding a tablet. Captain, Doctor, you need to see this. We analyzed their communication signals during the New York demonstration. The data showed complex but predictable patterns. They're using quantum channels, Tom explained, but with fixed frequencies. It's like they never considered someone might try to interrupt their signals. Miller rubbed his chin. Because no one ever has. They've been the strongest for so long, they forgot about being clever. He turned to Dr. Wells. How are the other projects coming along? She pulled up more screens. The first showed a modified fighter jet. We've adapted our electronic warfare systems to target their shield frequencies. The second-generation ECM pods should be ready in a week. What about ground forces? Tom stepped in. Even better. Remember how their transport technology needs full power? We've developed a device that forces their systems to attempt transport. It'll drain their power fast, and it's small enough to fit on a drone. Miller nodded, remembering how the Vinder had struggled with simple things like zero gravity. They rely too much on their advanced tech. Take that away. And they're in trouble, Dr. Wells finished. But there's more. Look at their weapons. The screen showed an analysis of the Vinder energy weapons. Pure brute force, she explained. They never developed sophisticated targeting systems because they never needed to. Their weapons are powerful enough to punch through most shields. Most shields designed like theirs, Miller added, understanding. But our experimental magnetic shields work completely differently, Tom said excitedly. They're weaker but more flexible. The Vinder weapons might punch through eventually, but it'll take them time. Time we can use. A general entered the room, looking grave. Captain, we've got movement. The Vinder are getting impatient. They just vaporized an empty military base in the Sahara as another demonstration. Miller's face hardened. They're trying to scare us into submission. How long until our countermeasures are ready? Global defense grid is at 60% coverage, Dr. Wells reported. Modified satellites are in position. Ground-based frequency disruptors are online in most major cities. Tom checked his tablet. First batch of adapted fighters is ready. Drone swarms are green across the board. Navy has finished upgrading their electronic warfare capabilities. The general added, all major military bases have been hardened with the new shields. We've also scattered our forces using their own playbook against them. Lots of dummy bases and decoys. Miller looked at the countdown timer on the wall. 16 days until the Vinder deadline. They think we're just sitting here, scared and primitive, waiting to submit. He smiled slightly. They have no idea we spent the last 2 weeks picking apart every flaw in their technology. Dr. Wells touched his arm. Jim, even with all this, they're still incredibly powerful. One of their ships could level a city. True, Miller nodded. But they've forgotten something important about humans. We've spent our entire history learning to fight bigger, stronger opponents. It's not always about who has the biggest stick. The general smiled grimly. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly where to poke the stick. Keep working, Miller ordered. When the Vinderi come to teach us a lesson, they're going to learn one instead. And I don't think they're going to like being the students. With only 1 week left until the deadline, the Vinderi called for a global broadcast. Every screen on Earth showed Ambassador Trell's metallic face, gleaming with contempt. Humans of Earth, his voice boomed. Your stubborn silence regarding our generous offer has not gone unnoticed. Today, we will educate you about your place in the galaxy. Captain Miller stood in the command center, watching with Dr. Wells and his team. The general beside him gripped his chair tightly as Trell continued. Let us review your species' achievements. Trell's grinding voice dripped with mockery. You took 10,000 years to discover basic agriculture. Another 5,000 years to understand simple machines. You still burn fossil fuels. And you think you're ready for the stars. The alien brought up images of Earth's space program. Look at your primitive vessels. Your International Space Station, a tin can held together by hope. Your rockets, crude chemical explosions that barely reach orbit. Your proudest achievement was walking on your own moon, and you haven't done even that in 50 years. Dr. Wells whispered, he's trying to break our spirit. Miller nodded, but he's telling us more than he realizes. He stepped forward and pressed the communication button. The UN had given him authority to speak for Earth in these exchanges. Ambassador Trell. Miller's calm voice cut through the alien's rant. You make interesting points about our development timeline. Trell paused, his metallic skin rippling in surprise. You dare interrupt? Yes, I dare, Miller replied evenly. Because you've missed something important. Everything you mentioned. We did it ourselves. No mentors, no guides, no advanced race holding our hands. We climbed out of the Stone Age on our own. The alien's face contorted. And look how long it took you. Time isn't the only measure of achievement, Ambassador. In just 100 years, we went from our first powered flight to landing on the moon. In 50 years, we went from basic computers to quantum processing. While you're busy bragging about your power, we're developing new solutions every day. Trell's metallic skin began to pulse with angry colors. You compare your primitive accomplishments to our glory. We mastered space travel when your ancestors were still fighting with sticks. Miller smiled slightly. And yet you still can't handle zero gravity without your technology helping you. We've seen your people stumble around our primitive space station. The command center fell silent. Miller had just publicly challenged the Vinderi's superiority. You dare. Trell's voice rose to a screech. You think because you can float in space, you understand anything. Your species is a cosmic accident, a mistake that needs correction. We understand more than you think, Miller replied. For instance, we understand that your transporters can't work while your shields are at full power. We understand that your communication systems use fixed quantum frequencies. We understand that your weapons waste energy because you never needed to be efficient. With each word, Trell's face became more distorted with rage. Silence. You understand, Notiang. We have guided dozens of species to civilization. No, Miller said firmly. You've bullied dozens of species into submission, but humanity isn't like the others. We don't need a mentor. We need partners who respect us. Trell's next words came out in a hiss. You wish to learn respect? Then let this be your first lesson. The broadcast cut to a view of a military base in Alaska. A Vinderi ship appeared above it, charging its weapons. Stop this, Miller warned. You don't want to start this fight. Fight. Trell laughed his grinding laugh. This isn't a fight. This is discipline. The ship fired, but instead of destruction, its beams scattered harmlessly against an invisible barrier. The base remained untouched. For the first time, Trell looked uncertain. What is this? Miller's smile was cold now. That, Ambassador, is one of our primitive solutions. Would you like to see more? The broadcast cut off abruptly. In the command center, alarms began to sound. The Vinder fleet was mobilizing. "Well," Dr. Wells said, checking her screens, "I guess diplomacy is over." Miller nodded to the general. "Send the alert. It's time to show our visitors why you should never underestimate a primitive species." The Vinder attacked 3 more bases in rapid succession. Their ships appeared over military installations in Brazil, India, and Russia, weapons charging. Each time, their energy beams splashed harmlessly against invisible shields. In the Rocky Mountain Command Center, Miller watched the attacks with his team. "They're following the exact pattern we predicted," he said, pointing to the tactical display. "No adaptation, no change in strategy." Dr. Wells nodded, her fingers flying over her keyboard. "Their arrogance is their weakness. They keep using the same approach, expecting different results." The general stepped in, his face grim but determined. "All units report ready, Captain. We've spread our forces exactly as planned. The Vinder are still targeting our decoy bases. Send the signal," Miller ordered. "Begin Phase 1. Around the world, hidden transmitters activated. They filled space with rapidly changing frequencies, targeting the exact weaknesses they'd discovered in Vinder communications. On the main screen, they watched as confusion spread through the alien fleet. The Vinder ships began to move erratically, their perfect formation breaking apart. "Their quantum channels are scrambled," Tom reported from his station. "They can't coordinate their attacks." Miller turned to Dr. Wells. "How long until they adapt?" "They can't," she smiled. "Their systems are designed for fixed frequencies. They'd need to rebuild their entire communication network to counter this." The general's phone buzzed. He listened briefly, then grinned. "Phase 2 is ready. Our modified fighters are in position." Miller nodded. "Launch the swarms." Across every continent, thousands of small drones took to the sky. They weren't armed. They didn't need to be. Each carried a device that forced the Vinder transportation systems to activate, draining their ship's power. On the screens, they watched the alien vessels struggle. Every time they tried to attack, the drones would swarm them, forcing their systems to waste energy on unnecessary transportation attempts. "Look at that," Tom said excitedly. "Their shields are weakening. They can't maintain full power while their transport systems are going haywire." Dr. Wells pointed to another display. "And here come our fighters." Squadrons of modified jets rose from hidden bases. They carried no missiles or bombs, just advanced electronic warfare pods that exploited every weakness they'd found in Vinder technology. The aliens tried to fire on the fighters, but their targeting systems couldn't handle the rapid, unpredictable movements. Human pilots, trained for dogfighting, easily evaded their clumsy attacks. "Message from the Vinder flagship," Tom announced. "Ambassador Trell is demanding we cease our primitive interference immediately." Miller took the comm. "This is Captain Miller. Having trouble with your superior technology, Ambassador. You insects." Trell's voice was shaking with rage. "How dare you use such crude tactics against us?" "Crude?" Miller watched as another Vinder ship lost shield power. "We're just applying what we learned from your demonstrations. You showed us all your strengths and all your weaknesses." The general interrupted. "Sir, the Chinese fleet is reporting success. Their EMP bursts are disrupting Vinder power systems, just as we hoped." Miller nodded. "You see, Ambassador, humans have something you forgot long ago. Adaptability. We don't just use brute force. We find solutions." "Impossible," Trell screeched. "Your species is too primitive to understand our technology." "No," Miller corrected him. "We're not primitive. We're efficient. While you relied on overwhelming power, we learned to do more with less. While you stagnated, we kept innovating." On the displays, more Vinder ships were retreating to higher orbits, their systems disrupted by Earth's coordinated defense. Dr. Wells checked her readings. "Their fleet's combat effectiveness is down to 40% and falling. They can't handle multiple threats simultaneously. Miller spoke into the comm again. Here's what's going to happen, Ambassador. You're going to withdraw your ships, return to your council, and report that Earth is not interested in your kind of mentorship. And if we refuse, Trell's voice had lost its confidence. Miller smiled grimly. Then we'll show you what else we've learned from studying your superior technology. Your choice. The command center watched as the Vinder fleet hung in space, facing the first real challenge they'd encountered in centuries. Earth waited for their answer, ready for either outcome. Ambassador Trell's answer came in the form of a massive energy burst from his flagship. The blast was meant to knock out Earth's power grids, a desperate attempt to disable humanity's defenses. But Miller and his team had prepared for this too. Activate the global shield network, Miller ordered calmly. Dr. Wells pressed a sequence of commands. Across the planet, hidden generators powered up. The energy burst hit a web of overlapping magnetic shields, dispersing harmlessly into space. Impossible. Trell's voice boomed through the command center. Your primitive world couldn't have developed planetary shields. We didn't have them 2 weeks ago, Miller replied. But thanks to your demonstrations, we learned a lot about energy manipulation. Tom, show them what else we learned. Tom grinned and activated the satellite network. Hundreds of modified communications satellites changed position, surrounding the Vinder fleet in a complex web of energy fields. You see, Miller explained, while you were busy showing off your power, we were studying how your ships handle multiple frequencies, or rather, how they don't. The satellites began broadcasting on thousands of different frequencies simultaneously. Vinder shields flickered and failed. Their ships' computer systems crashed and rebooted in endless cycles. All squadrons, execute attack pattern Delta, the general commanded. Fighters swooped in from every direction, their electronic warfare pods creating chaos in the alien fleet. Drones swarmed between the larger ships, forcing their transport systems to activate randomly, draining their power reserves. Flagship is trying to coordinate a counterattack, Dr. Wells reported, watching her screens. But they can't maintain stable communications. Their rigid systems can't handle our frequency jamming. Miller watched as the mighty Vinder fleet fell into disarray. Ships collided with each other, their automated systems confused by the electronic assault. Others drifted powerless, their energy drained by constant shield and transporter malfunctions. Sir, Tom called out. They're charging their main weapon arrays. Looks like they're going to try a synchronized blast. Just as we expected, Miller nodded to Dr. Wells. Ready the pulse. She smiled, her finger hovering over a button. Ready, waiting for them to commit. The Vinder ships moved into formation, their weapons glowing with gathered energy. Just as they prepared to fire, Dr. Wells struck. A carefully calculated electromagnetic pulse, designed specifically to interfere with Vinder power systems, rippled out from hidden stations around the globe. The alien ships froze mid-attack, their energy weapons sputtering and dying. Direct hit. Tom cheered. Their power cores are destabilizing. They'll have to shut down all offensive systems or risk total failure. Through the command center speakers, they could hear chaos and panic in the Vinder communications. Their rigid command structure was breaking down as ships lost power and crews faced situations they'd never trained for. Captain Miller. Trell's voice had lost all its arrogance. This is not possible. You're violating all known principles of technological progression. No, Ambassador, Miller replied. We're just fighting smarter, not harder. Something you forgot how to do a long time ago. On the main screen, they watched as the Vinder flagship's lights flickered and died. Emergency systems kicked in, but they too were vulnerable to the humans' electronic warfare. Your last chance, Ambassador, Miller announced. Withdraw now, or we'll be forced to demonstrate just how much we've learned about disabling your ships permanently. There was a long pause. In the background, they could hear Vinder officers arguing in their grinding language. Finally, Trell spoke, his voice heavy with disbelief. We withdraw. But the council will hear of this outrage. Good, Miller smiled. Tell them everything. Tell them how a primitive species outsmarted your superior technology. Tell them why it's dangerous to underestimate others. The Vinder fleet, once proud and mighty, limped away from Earth. Their ships, still struggling with failing systems, looked nothing like the invincible armada that had arrived so confidently weeks ago. In the Rocky Mountain Command Center, humanity's defenders watched them go, knowing that the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. 1 month after the Battle of Earth, Captain Miller stood before the Galactic Council. The massive chamber held representatives from hundreds of species, all watching the first human to address their assembly. Unlike the Vinder with their liquid metal forms, the council members came in all shapes and sizes. Some floated in anti-gravity fields, others sat in environmental bubbles, and a few appeared only as holograms. Honorable Council, Miller began, I'm here to present Earth's case for independent status in the galactic community. The head counselor, a tall being with crystalline features, leaned forward. We have reviewed the events involving the Vinder fleet. Their report was most interesting. I imagine it was. Miller smiled slightly. Though I suspect they left out certain details. Dr. Wells, standing beside him, activated a holographic display. It showed footage from the battle, demonstrating how Earth had systematically dismantled the Vinder's supposedly superior technology. In just 3 weeks, Miller continued, we analyzed their systems, found their weaknesses, and developed countermeasures. Not because we're naturally superior, but because we've never stopped learning, adapting, and innovating. The chamber buzzed with conversation. A representative that looked like a floating cloud of light spoke up. But the Vinder were your assigned mentors. Their technology level is centuries beyond yours. Technology levels aren't everything. Dr. Wells stepped in. The Vinder forgot that. They relied on overwhelming power while ignoring efficiency and adaptation. Miller nodded. They showed us their greatest achievements, thinking we couldn't understand them. Instead, we learned from them and improved upon their designs within weeks. The head counselor's crystal face sparkled with interest. And yet you didn't destroy their fleet when you had the chance. Why? Because Earth doesn't seek dominance, Miller replied. We want to join the galactic community as equals, not conquerors or subjects. We have much to learn, but we also have much to offer. Suddenly, a small figure hurried into the chamber. It looked like a cross between a rabbit and a lizard, wearing simple working clothes instead of formal robes. Please, it called out. Let the human speak with us too. The council stirred uncomfortably. The head counselor sighed. The Kareth are not recognized. They are still under Vinderi mentorship. That's why we're here, the Kareth delegate said firmly. We saw what Earth did. They proved the Vinderi aren't invincible. We want the same chance to prove ourselves. More voices joined in. Other mentored species began speaking up, demanding the right to demonstrate their capabilities. The chamber erupted in debate. Miller raised his hand for silence. If I may suggest a solution, Earth would be happy to establish a new kind of exchange program. Not mentorship, but partnership. Species learning from each other as equals. The head counselor considered this. The Vinderi system has stood for centuries. And look where it got them, Dr. Wells pointed out. They became stagnant, overconfident. True progress comes from collaboration, not domination. The chamber fell quiet as the council deliberated. Finally, the head counselor spoke. Earth has indeed proven itself. We grant you independent status, with the right to establish diplomatic relations with any species. The crystalline face turned to the other petitioners. As for the mentorship program, perhaps it is time for reform. The chamber erupted in cheers. The Kareth delegate rushed to Miller, eyes shining. Will Earth really help us? Of course, Miller smiled. We know what it's like to be underestimated. And we've learned some interesting things about dealing with superior technology. As they left the chamber, Dr. Wells grinned at him. Not bad for a primitive species, huh? Miller watched as representatives from various mentored species gathered around them, eager to learn Earth's secrets. You know what the Vinderies' biggest mistake was? They thought teaching meant controlling. They never understood that the best students often become the greatest teachers. Earth had earned its place among the stars, not through overwhelming power, but through intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to help others rise alongside them. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed.